Sarah, stay with me. The ambulance is almost here. Just hold on.
Tell them I tried.
Daniel didn't sleep that night. He lay on the couch with one arm draped over the edge, fingers brushing the carpet so he could feel something solid, something real. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock and the distant hiss of rain still falling outside. Every time his eyes closed, he saw the alley, the blood, the badge. The way Sarah's hand had trembled as she grabbed his wrist. They're still out there. At 4:12 a.m., he got up and checked the locks again. The front door, the back door, the windows, all secure. Still, the unease didn't leave. Daniel stood at the window and stared out into the street. The rain had slowed to a mist, streetlights glowing faintly through the fog. Everything looked normal. Too normal. At 6:30 a.m., Lily padded out of her room in mismatched socks, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" she said softly. He turned immediately, forcing the tension from his face. "Morning, Bug. Why are you awake already?" He hesitated. "Bad dreams?" She nodded solemnly, as if she understood more than she let on, then climbed onto the couch beside him. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her a little tighter than usual. She smelled like cheap shampoo and sleep, normal, safe. That was all he wanted. The unmarked car appeared at 10:17 a.m. Daniel noticed it while washing dishes. A dark sedan rolled slowly down the street and stopped across from his house. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. The engine didn't turn off. It just sat there, watching. His pulse quickened. He dried his hands slowly and stepped closer to the window, staying just out of view. 5 minutes passed. 10. The car didn't move. By the time Lily asked if they could go to the park, the sedan finally pulled away. Daniel didn't relax. He couldn't. At noon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. At 12:03, it rang again, then again at 12:07. Finally, he answered. "Daniel Carter?" a man's voice said calmly. "This is Lieutenant Mark Harlan with Harbor City Police. Just checking in. We'd like you to come by the precinct later today to give a formal statement." Daniel's mouth went dry. "I already talked to officers last night." "Yes," Harlan replied smoothly. "But this will be more detailed. Am I in trouble?" Daniel asked, a pause barely perceptible. "No," Harlan said. "Not at all. You did the right thing." Daniel glanced toward the window, half expecting to see the sedan back again. "When?" he asked. "Your convenience," Harlan said. "But sooner is better." They hung up. Daniel stood there staring at his phone long after the call ended. "You did the right thing." The words felt hollow. Sarah Mitchell woke up to the sound of machines, beeping, hissing, breathing that wasn't entirely her own. Her body felt heavy, like it had been filled with wet sand. Pain radiated through her side in deep, pulsing waves that made her grit her teeth. She forced her eyes open, white ceiling, harsh lights, hospital. Memory rushed back in fragments, the alley. The shot, the man in the rain. Her fingers twitched. She tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. A nurse rushed to her side. "Easy, you've been through a lot. Where's my badge?" Sarah croaked. The nurse hesitated just a second too long. "Your belongings are being held for evidence." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Who's guarding me?" she asked. "Officers from your precinct." That was exactly the wrong answer. Sarah closed her eyes. She'd known this would happen. By the second day, Daniel's life began to unravel in small, deliberate ways. His supervisor at the warehouse called him into the office and shut the door. "We've got a problem," the man said, folding his hands on the desk. "Inventory came up short last night." Daniel frowned. "I wasn't even assigned to that section. Someone reported seeing you near it." Daniel felt heat creep up his neck. "Who?" The supervisor shook his head. "Anonymous. He was suspended pending investigation." That afternoon, Child Protective Services knocked on his door. The woman was polite, professional, too calm. "Mr. Carter," she said, clipboard tucked under her arm, "we received a report expressing concerns about your daughter's safety." Daniel's chest tightened. "What kind of concerns?" "Neglect, emotional instability, exposure to dangerous situations." The words hit like blows. "This is insane," Daniel said. "I take care of my daughter." "I'm sure you do," she replied gently. "This is just a routine check." "Routine," Nothing about this felt routine. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Someone was squeezing him, testing how much pressure he could take before breaking. And then he felt it. Something stiff inside the pocket of the jacket he'd worn the night of the shooting, the same jacket hanging over the chair. He froze. Slowly, he reached into the pocket. His fingers closed around a small plastic rectangle. A flash drive. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he plugged it into his old laptop. What he saw stole the air from his lungs. Video files, dozens of them. Bodycam footage, some raw, some clearly altered. Audio recordings of conversations that were never meant to be heard. Photos of evidence lockers with dates and times scribbled in the margins. He clicked one video at random. 2 officers stood over a man on his knees, hands zip-tied behind his back. "You sure he's clean?" one asked. The other laughed. "Doesn't matter," the gunshot echoed through Daniel's speakers. He slammed the laptop shut, heart racing, then forced himself to open it again. More files. Drug seizures rerouted. Witness statements edited, names highlighted again and again. Lieutenant Mark Harlan. Daniel leaned back, shaking. This wasn't just corruption. This was murder. And Sarah Mitchell had trusted him with it. At the hospital, Sarah lay awake as footsteps approached her room. She recognized the cadence immediately, Lieutenant Harlan. He entered with 2 other officers, smiling like a man visiting an old friend. "You gave us quite a scare," he said. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot," Sarah replied flatly. He chuckled. "Fair enough." He pulled a chair close to her bed and sat down. "You remember the civilian?" he asked casually. Sarah met his eyes. "Yes." "Good," Harlan said. "We've spoken to him. Seems cooperative." Sarah searched his face for cracks, found none. "He help you find the shooter?" she asked. Harlan stood. "We're working on it." As he turned to leave, Sarah spoke quietly. "You should check his jacket pockets." Harlan paused, just for a second. Then he smiled again. "Good advice." When he left, Sarah exhaled slowly. She prayed she wasn't too late. Daniel packed a small bag that night. Just essentials, clothes, documents, Lily's birth certificate. He told himself it was just precaution, but deep down, he knew they were coming. He kissed Lily's forehead as she slept, then sat back at the kitchen table and stared at the flash drive. Running would mean silence. Staying would mean war. At dawn, he made his choice. He put Lily in the car, drove past the police station, and kept going. The FBI field office was a plain building with no sign out front. Daniel parked, took a deep breath, and held Lily's hand as they walked inside. The agent at the desk looked up. "Can I help you?" Daniel swallowed. "I need to report police corruption," he said. "And I need protection." The agent's expression changed instantly. "Sir," he said, standing, "you'd better come with me." The door closed behind them. And the truth stepped into the light. The first raid began at 5:42 a.m. Lieutenant Mark Harlan was pouring himself coffee when the lights went out. Not flickered out. The hum of the precinct died instantly, replaced by a sudden, unnatural silence. Harlan frowned, mug halfway to his lips. Power outages were rare in Harbor City, especially in the downtown district. Then the emergency lights kicked on, red, not the comforting amber of backup systems red. Before he could react, the front doors exploded inward. "Federal agents! Everyone on the ground!" "Now!" The sound was deafening. Boots thundered across tile. Rifles snapped into position. Shouts echoed off the walls as stunned officers dropped where they stood, hands raised, faces pale. Harlan froze. For half a second, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. Then instinct took over. He turned toward his office. Too late. 2 agents blocked the doorway, weapons trained on his chest. "Lieutenant Mark Harlan," one said coldly. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, racketeering, and multiple counts of homicide." Harlan laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "This is a mistake." The agent stepped forward and snapped cuffs around his wrists. "No," he said. "This is overdue." Across Harbor City, the same scene unfolded in brutal synchronization. Precincts were sealed before officers even finished their shifts. Patrol cars were boxed in by unmarked SUVs. Evidence lockers were photographed, cataloged, and welded shut under federal supervision. Officers who had once walked with swagger were forced to kneel on pavement slick with morning dew. Some shouted, some cried. Some stared straight ahead, knowing exactly why this was happening. And some too many tried to run. They didn't get far. Daniel Carter watched the live feed from a small conference room inside the FBI field office. Lily sat beside him, coloring quietly, unaware that the images flashing across the muted television were reshaping her father's life forever. Agents moved with precision, barking commands, escorting familiar faces out of buildings in handcuffs. Daniel recognized some of them. The officer who'd questioned him in the alley. The detective who'd visited his house just to follow up. The patrolman who'd smiled too hard when CPS showed up. Daniel's stomach churned. A woman in a dark suit stood beside him, arms crossed. Special Agent Rebecca Hayes. "This is bigger than we anticipated," she said. "Your evidence cracked it wide open." Daniel swallowed. "What happens now?" "Now?" She glanced at Lily, then back at him. "Now we make sure they can't hurt you," Sarah Mitchell woke to shouting. Her hospital room door burst open as armed agents poured in, sweeping the room with trained efficiency. For a terrifying moment, Sarah thought she'd miscalculated, that the wrong side had arrived first. Then she saw the jackets, FBI. Relief hit her so hard she almost cried. "Detective Sarah Mitchell," Agent Hayes said gently, stepping forward. "You're safe now." Sarah let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for months. "About damn time," she muttered. Lieutenant Harlan sat in an interrogation room, jaw clenched, eyes burning holes into the one-way mirror. They'd taken his badge. His gun, his phone, everything that had ever given him power. An agent entered, placing a thick folder on the table. "Let's start easy," the agent said. "You want to explain why your name appears in 37 separate recordings detailing illegal seizures, falsified reports, and executions?" Harlan leaned back, crossing his arms. "You've got nothing." The agent smiled thinly and opened the folder. He slid a photo across the table. Daniel Carter. Harlan's face hardened. "You underestimated him," the agent said. "That was your mistake. Not everyone went quietly." At the Harbor City North Precinct, Detective Evan Ross barricaded himself in an office, shouting that this was a setup. He claimed Internal Affairs had fabricated everything, that the feds were overreaching. Then an agent played audio through the door. Ross's voice, laughing, discussing which evidence to plant and which suspect to make disappear. The door opened 5 seconds later. By noon, the city was in chaos. News helicopters hovered overhead, reporters crowded police lines. Social media exploded with shaky phone footage of arrests and leaked documents. Police corruption ring exposed, Internal Affairs officer nearly killed for investigation. Single father key witness in federal case. Daniel stopped reading after that last headline. Agent Hayes noticed. "We'll move you tonight," she said. "Temporary housing. New numbers security." Daniel nodded. "What about her?" He glanced at Lily. "She be protected," Hayes said firmly. Inside the hospital, Sarah gave her first official statement. It lasted 8 hours. She spoke without notes, dates, times, names. She described the moment she realized the corruption wasn't isolated, that it was a network, tightly woven, protected by silence and fear. She explained how she'd gathered evidence slowly, carefully, knowing one mistake would get her killed. "They knew I was closing in," she said quietly. "The alley was supposed to be the end. Why didn't you go public sooner?" An agent asked. Sarah's gaze drifted to the window. "Because I wanted it to stick." As arrests mounted, the cracks spread outward. City officials resigned overnight. Prosecutors quietly asked for immunity. A judge was placed under investigation after records showed sealed warrants approved without cause. The police union released a statement calling the raids an attack on law enforcement integrity. It fooled no one. When footage surfaced of officers executing suspects and falsifying evidence, public outrage boiled over. Protests erupted outside precincts. Some were peaceful, others were not. Trust once broken didn't mend quietly. Harlan's interrogation grew uglier. "You think you're a hero?" he snarled at one point. "You think this changes anything?" The agent leaned forward. "It changes everything," Harlan laughed bitterly. They'll rebuild. They always do. Maybe, the agent replied. But you won't be part of it. Harlan's laughter died. Daniel finally met Sarah again 3 days after the raids. She was pale, still weak, but sitting upright in a secured hospital room. 2 federal agents stood guard outside. When Daniel stepped in, she looked up and smiled. You're real, she said softly. I was starting to think I imagined you. He shook his head. Same. They sat in silence for a moment. I'm sorry, Sarah said finally. They went after your daughter. Daniel clenched his jaw. They didn't win, she nodded. You could have walked away. I almost did, he admitted. But you didn't, she said. That's why this worked. Not everyone survived the collapse intact. One officer was found dead in his home, ruled a suicide. Another disappeared entirely, prompting an international manhunt. Files hinted at deeper connections, organized crime, political payoffs, federal cases still sealed. The rot went deep. But it was exposed now, and sunlight is unforgiving. As night fell, Daniel and Lily were escorted to a temporary safe house. Lily looked out the window at the passing lights. Daddy, she said quietly, are the bad guys gone? Daniel thought about the men in handcuffs, about the ones still hiding, about how fragile justice really was. Some of them, he said. Enough for now. She nodded, satisfied. Daniel wasn't, because tomorrow the trials would begin, and that was when the truth would have to stand on its own. The police report would later say the officer was found at 217A. What it wouldn't say was that if one exhausted single father hadn't ignored every instinct screaming at him to keep driving, she would have died alone in the rain, and an entire police department would have remained rotten to its core. The rain fell like it meant to drown the city. It came down in sheets, hammering rooftops, flooding gutters, turning Harbor City's streets into slick rivers of oil and neon. Streetlights flickered like tired eyes refusing to stay open. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed and then faded, swallowed by the storm. Daniel Carter drove slowly, hands tight on the steering wheel. His windshield wipers squeaked with each pass, smearing water instead of clearing it. The heater rattled, barely working, pushing out lukewarm air that smelled faintly of rust. His body ached from 14 hours on his feet at the warehouse lifting crates, scanning labels, pretending his back didn't scream every time he bent down. In the rearview mirror, he checked on Lily. She slept curled in the back seat, her small fingers clutching the sleeve of his old jacket. Her hair stuck to her cheek, damp with sweat despite the cold. She'd insisted on waiting up for him again. She always did, and every time she lost the battle halfway home. Daniel's mouth curved into a tired smile. Almost home, kiddo, he murmured, even though she couldn't hear him. Being a single dad wasn't something he'd planned. It was something life had dumped on him without instructions. 2 years ago, his wife had walked out with a suitcase and a promise to call soon. The call never came. Just papers in the mail and silence afterward. Since then, it had been just him and Lily, no safety net, no backup plan. Every choice mattered, which was why he should have kept driving. He almost did. The smear across the road looked like nothing at first, just another dark shadow made by rain and broken streetlight. But as his headlights rolled over it, something in Daniel's chest tightened. That wasn't oil. That was blood. His foot eased off the gas. No, he whispered to himself. No, no, no. The road narrowed as it led toward an old commercial strip long abandoned by businesses and hope alike. Boarded-up shops leaned against each other like drunks. Trash skittered in the wind. A flickering sign buzzed overhead, letters missing, spelling nothing at all. The blood trail continued. Straight into an alley. Daniel's heart began to pound so hard he could feel it in his throat. Every rational thought screamed at him to turn around. Harbor City alleys were where bad things happened. Everyone knew that, and he had Lily in the car. He slowed to a stop. Rain drummed on the roof as the engine idled. His hands trembled slightly on the wheel. He glanced at the back seat again. Lily slept on, peaceful, unaware of the decision her father was about to make. Daniel swallowed. Just a look, he said quietly. That's all. He put the car in park and stepped out into the rain. Cold soaked through him instantly. The smell hit neck-wet asphalt, garbage, metal, and something coppery that made his stomach turn. Blood. The alley was narrow, boxed in by brick walls slick with rain. A dumpster overflowed near the entrance. Water streamed down the walls like tears. And there, halfway down the alley, was a body. Daniel's breath caught. She lay face down, one arm stretched out as if reaching for something she'd never touched. Dark hair spilled across her cheek. Her uniform was soaked through, clinging to her like a second skin. A police uniform. Oh, God, Daniel breathed. He hesitated only a second before moving. As he knelt beside her, she shifted. A sound escaped her throat, low, broken, unmistakably human. She was alive. Daniel carefully placed a hand on her shoulder. Hey, can you hear me? She groaned, her body trembling as if the effort of breathing alone was too much. He rolled her gently onto her side, then onto her back. Blood soaked the front of her uniform. A bullet wound sat just below her ribs, dark and ugly, still bleeding despite the rain trying to wash it away. Her eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused, but filled with fear. Don't, she whispered. Don't call yet, Daniel froze. What? They're still out there, his pulse spiked. He glanced over his shoulder, scanning the alley mouth, the street beyond. Rain distorted everything. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been any. I'm calling an ambulance, he said firmly. You need help. Now? She reached up suddenly, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Her fingers were cold, slick with blood. No police, she rasped. He stared at her in disbelief. You're wearing a badge? She swallowed hard, pain flashing across her face. That's why. Daniel didn't understand, but he understood fear. My name's Daniel, he said, lowering his voice, leaning closer so she could hear him over the rain. I've got you. Just stay with me, okay? Her grip loosened slightly. What's your name? He asked. Sarah, she whispered. Sarah Mitchell? She coughed violently, blood staining her lips. Daniel pulled off his jacket and pressed it against her wound, applying pressure like he'd seen in movies, hoping it was enough. You're going to be okay, he said, though he had no idea if that was true. She shook her head faintly. Internal affairs? The words hit him harder than the rain. Internal affairs? The cops who investigated other cops. Daniel's stomach dropped. Sirens wailed in the distance, still far, but getting closer. Sarah's breathing grew shallow. Her eyes drifted shut. Hey, no, Daniel said urgently. Stay with me? Talk to me. She struggled to focus. If they ask, you don't know anything. Who? He demanded, but her head lolled to the side. Sarah? He shouted. Panic surged through him. He fumbled for his phone, hands slick with rain and blood, and dialed 911. Emergency services, what's your location? There's an officer down, Daniel said, voice shaking. She's been shot. We're in an alley off Grant and 12th. She's losing blood, please hurry. He hung up and pressed harder on the wound. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the night exploded with red and blue light. Police cruisers screeched to a stop at the alley entrance. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. Hands up! Step away from the officer! Daniel raised his hands instantly, backing away. She's alive, he said quickly. She needs help. Paramedics rushed past him, dropping to their knees beside Sarah, working with practiced urgency. Oxygen mask, 4, stretcher. An officer grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him aside. Who are you? The officer barked. Daniel Carter, he replied. I found her. What were you doing here? Driving home. The officer's eyes flicked toward Daniel's car. There a kid in that vehicle? Yes, my daughter. Another officer jogged over to check. As Sarah was lifted onto the stretcher, her eyes opened one last time. They locked onto Daniel. Barely visible beneath the chaos, she moved her hand, slipping something into the pocket of his jacket. Daniel didn't notice, but someone else did. A tall officer stood a few steps back from the action, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. His face was calm. Too calm, his eyes never left Daniel. Lieutenant Mark Harlan. He stepped forward. You're lucky you stopped, Harlan said evenly. Not many people would, Daniel nodded, uneasy. I just couldn't leave her. Harlan studied him like a problem that hadn't revealed its solution yet. Get his information, he ordered. We'll be in touch. As the ambulance doors slammed shut and sirens screamed back into the night, Daniel felt something settle in his gut. This wasn't over. He returned to his car, soaked, shaking. Lily stirred as he got in. "Daddy?" she murmured. "Why are the lights so loud?" He really looked at her and forced a smile. "Everything's okay," he said, though he wasn't sure it ever would be again. As he drove away, he didn't see the unmarked cruiser pull out behind him. And he didn't yet know that the decision he'd made in that rain-soaked alley had just placed him and his daughter directly in the crosshairs of something far bigger than either of them. The courthouse had never felt so heavy. Even before dawn, people crowded the steps, reporters with microphones clutched like weapons, protesters holding signs that trembled in the cold morning air, families standing quietly to one side with faces drawn tight by shame or grief. Police officers, those not under investigation, lined the perimeter, their expressions guarded, unreadable. Daniel Carter stood near the back of the crowd, Lily's small hand wrapped tightly around his. She wore a yellow sweater and sneakers that lit up when she walked. Daniel had almost told her to stay behind, but she'd insisted. "I want to see where you go," she'd said simply. So here they were. The place where everything would finally be said out loud. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a low, constant murmur. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted. Cameras clicked until a bailiff barked for silence. The smell of old paper, polish, and tension filled the air. Daniel took a seat behind the prosecution table. Across the aisle, the defense benches were packed. 32 former officers. Some stared straight ahead, jaws clenched. Some whispered to their attorneys. Some looked lost, as if the world had ended without asking their permission. Lieutenant Mark Harlan sat at the center. He looked smaller now. The uniform was gone. The authority stripped away. He wore a plain gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. His hair was thinner, his eyes ringed with exhaustion, but when his gaze met Daniel's, there was still something hard there, resentment, disbelief, hatred. Daniel looked away. Behind him, Sarah Mitchell entered the courtroom slowly, leaning slightly on a cane. The room seemed to shift when she appeared. Conversations died mid-sentence, heads turned. The woman who had refused to die. She took her seat near the front, her expression calm but focused. Daniel felt a strange tightening in his chest when he saw her, something like pride mixed with fear. This was it. There was no going back. The trial lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of testimony that peeled back the department layer by layer. Prosecutors laid out timelines so precise they felt surgical. Charts connected names to crimes, crimes to dates, dates to cover-ups. Video footage played on massive screens, some of it so disturbing that the judge ordered the gallery cleared. Witnesses took the stand. Former officers who had flipped in exchange for lighter sentences spoke with shaking voices. Civilians who had lost family members stared straight at the defendants, their pain raw and unfiltered. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood slowly, steadying herself, and walked to the witness stand. Every eye in the room followed her. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Then she did. She spoke of patterns, of inconsistencies no one wanted to see, of reports that never quite matched the evidence, of suspects who disappeared from holding cells in cases quietly closed. "I didn't start this investigation because I wanted attention," she said calmly. "I started it because people were dying," a defense attorney stood. "Detective Mitchell, isn't it true that Internal Affairs has a reputation for targeting good officers?" Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "It has a reputation for asking questions people don't like." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. She described the night in the alley. The call that lured her there, the ambush, the shot. "And why didn't you call for backup?" the attorney pressed. "Because backup was part of the problem," she replied. The room fell silent. Sarah glanced briefly toward Daniel. "I survived because a man who owed me nothing chose to stop," she said. "That choice is the only reason this court is even possible." Daniel felt his throat tighten. When Daniel took the stand, his hands shook at first. He wasn't trained for this. He wasn't used to being watched. His life had always existed quietly, on the edges of things, work, home, survival. But as he spoke, something steadied him. He described the alley, the fear, the blood, the moment he almost drove away. He spoke of the days that followed, the surveillance, the threats, the quiet pressure meant to break him. "Why didn't you?" the prosecutor asked gently. Daniel thought of Lily. "Because I didn't want my daughter growing up thinking silence was the same as safety," he said. On the defense bench, Harlan scoffed audibly. The judge warned him once. The most explosive testimony came in the fourth week. A former detective named Morales, once considered untouchable, took the stand. He looked broken. "I thought I was protecting the department," he said, voice cracking. "That's what they told us. That if the public knew, everything would fall apart." "And what do you believe now?" the prosecutor asked. Morales swallowed. "I believe we were the ones destroying it." He named names. Harlan's among them. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged the gavel, shouting for order. Daniel watched Harlan's composure finally crack. Outside the courthouse, the city changed. Statues were defaced, murals painted over. Protesters clashed with counter-protesters. Trust already fragile fractured completely. Some people still defended the officers. Others demanded the department be dismantled entirely. Daniel kept his head down. He walked Lily to school every morning under the watch of federal security. He answered questions she didn't fully understand. "Why do people shout when they see you on TV?" she asked once. "Because they're scared," he said. "Of you?" "No," Daniel replied softly. "Of the truth." Closing arguments arrived like the final toll of a bell. The prosecutor stood before the jury, voice steady. "This case is not about all police," she said. "It's about power abused and silence weaponized. It's about what happens when those sworn to protect decide they are untouchable," the defense argued. Conspiracies, overreach, betrayal. When it was over, the jury left the room. The wait stretched for 2 days. 2 days of pacing, whispered conversations, and sleepless nights. On the third morning, the jury returned. Daniel held Lily's hand. The foreperson stood. On count after count, the word echoed through the room. "Guilty," gasps, sobs, silence, 32 convictions. Some officers collapsed into their seats. Others stared blankly ahead. Harlan remained standing. When the verdict was read for him, life without parole, his face went slack. For the first time, he looked afraid. He turned toward Daniel, rage burning through the fear. "You think this makes you better than us?" he shouted before marshals dragged him away. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sentencing took another month. By then, the city was exhausted, so was Daniel. On the final day, Sarah sat beside him as the judge delivered the last ruling. When it was over, when the room finally emptied, they stayed seated. For a long time, neither spoke. "It's done," Daniel said finally. Sarah nodded. "As done as it can be?" They stepped outside into sunlight that felt almost unfamiliar. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions. Daniel shielded Lily instinctively. Sarah stepped in front of them. "No more," she said firmly. "He's not a symbol. He's a father." The cameras clicked anyway, but something shifted. They backed off. Weeks passed. Life didn't snap back into place. It reassembled slowly. Daniel found a new job, quieter, steadier. Lily adjusted to a school where no one whispered when she walked by. The department underwent reform. New leadership, new oversight. New rules written in the aftermath of disaster. Some believed it would last. Some didn't. Sarah returned to work not in internal affairs, but training. Teaching new recruits what accountability actually meant. One evening, she stood outside Daniel's house, watching Lily ride her bike in slow circles. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked. Daniel shook his head. Every day was hard. "None of it was wrong," she smiled. "Me neither." Months later, Daniel tucked Lily into bed. "Daddy?" she asked, eyes heavy with sleep. "Yes, Bug?" "Are the bad guys gone for good?" Daniel considered the question. "No," he said gently, "but they know now. Someone will stop." She nodded, satisfied. As he turned off the light, Daniel stood in the doorway a moment longer. He thought of a rainy alley, of a woman bleeding in the dark, of a choice that had rewritten his life. He hadn't wanted to be brave. He'd just refused to look away. And sometimes he knew now that was enough.